Hello and welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my rewatch review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. This is part 2 in a series of videos I am doing in the lead up for Strange New Worlds Season 3. So I have already rewatched and reviewed all of the episodes of Strange New Worlds Season 1. That is in a separate video. I'll put the link to that in the description below. And now I am covering Season 2. But before I get into Season 2, there's one thing I forgot to do at the end of my video of Season 1, which is that I'm supposed to give my original rating for the entire season and my rewatch rating for the entire season, and I didn't do that. So I'm just going to do that really quickly. I don't need to put up a graphic or anything like that. It's a 9. It's a 9 out of 9. I originally gave it a 9, rewatch a 9. Still one of my favorite seasons of Star Trek. So now the question remains, will Season 2 hold up to that? Because Season 2, I'll just tell you right now, I originally gave it a 9, but I gave it a weaker 9 than Season 1. I thought Season 1 was better, but it still got a 9. Now let's see if that's still the case at the end of all this, and I'll circle back around to that at the end. But first I'm going to go through, just like I did with the Season 1 video, go through each of the episodes and give my rewatch rating first, what I thought of it now after I rewatched the episode, and then we'll give my original rating that I gave 2 years ago in 2023. Now, doing Season 2 is a little bit more complicated than I thought it would be, because I had forgotten that back in 2023, I actually gave some of the episodes 2 ratings, because I gave every episode a rating after I originally reviewed it when it first came on. And then I did a Season 2 full season review at the end, where I went back and reviewed, kind of like what I'm doing now, each episode, and gave it a new rating. Some of the ratings stayed the same, but some of them changed. So in order to cover all the different ratings out of 10s that I have given these episodes, in the cases of the ones that didn't change, it'll still be just like I did in Season 1. It'll still be 2 ratings. But for the episodes where I gave 1 rating when I first saw it and then a different rating at the end of the season, I'm going to include both of those. It'll be interesting to see some of the patterns. A lot of them go steadily downward. A couple of them go a little up. And you'll see a couple of them kind of go back around full circle to where they started. But we don't need to get into the weeds of all that. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Let us start with Season 2, Episode 1, and go through to Season 2, Episode 10. Okay, we begin with Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 1, The Broken Circle. Be the circle, be unbroken, by and by and by and by. Sorry, there are certain episodes that evoke songs for me. There was a couple of them in Season 1 as well, but it's too early to start breaking out in the song. That happens later in the season. So anyway, The Broken Circle turns out pretty forgettable episode, at least for me, because when I was prepared to rewatch Season 2, I was like, wait, what was the first episode again? Like, I remember, of course, that Episode 2 is the big trial episode, but I was like, wait, what happened in Episode 1? And then I looked at the title, The Broken Circle, and saw a picture of Spock, and I was like, oh, right, yeah, Spock goes to the Klingon planet, and Pike is off screen going to find that lawyer for Episode 2. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, all right. It's coming back to me now, and I did remember that I liked it, and generally liked it more than the general public seemed to. A lot of people shat on this episode, and I remember liking it. So I was like, okay, we'll see what I think about it now. And I don't know if I'm down now with a lot of the people who were kind of crapping on it, but I do think I like it less. And the main reason I like it less is the Mabanga and Nurse Chapel storyline. In fact, that's really the only reason I like it less. Spoiler alert, this rating is going to go down from what I originally gave it, and it is 1,000% because of that particular storyline. So this is where Nurse Chapel and Mabanga first take the super soldier serum, and it's the first inkling that we get of their trauma from fighting in the war. And I think the reason why this bothers me more now than it did 2 years ago is because now I'm coming fresh off of watching season 1. Like, I went straight from season 1 directly into season 2. And in doing that, this storyline felt very jarring because it comes completely out of the thin blue sky. Like, it's not even remotely even hinted at in season 1 that Chapel and Mabanga have this past. I think when I originally watched it, it had been a year since I'd seen season 1, and I was like, oh, it's probably, I'm sure it was mentioned, and I just don't remember. But having just freshly watched season 1, it isn't even remotely hinted at all. Like, it's just something that just seems to come out of nowhere, and it felt very jarring to me. It feels like they didn't know what to do with Mabanga now that his daughter's storyline has been wrapped up. So like, we got to come up with something else. So let's invent this war trauma and super soldier serum out of nowhere. And it felt very jarring to me. I know I didn't love that the first time I watched it either, but I think I like it even less now. And of course, this is going to come back up in a later episode, but I'll wait till I get to that one. Yeah, that really threw me off. But I still enjoy the main storyline. I still enjoy the Spock storyline. I enjoy seeing him. He's going through this journey, which he goes throughout the season of struggling with his human side and getting to or at least working his way up to the point where we see him at the start of the original series when he's played by Leonard Nimoy and he's completely logical. I forgot to mention this in my season 1 review, but I caught something in the Serene Squall that I missed last time as the Captain Angel, when she was pretending to be the scientist or whatever, she mentions this Vulcan ceremony that you go under to become completely logical. And I don't think it's the thing that he does in the motion picture with the long hair. I took it as it's maybe something that he's going to do between now and the start of the original series. So that's why he becomes Leonard Nimoy, is because he goes through this ritual that he hasn't gone through yet. So we're watching him like kind of struggle with this. And I thought that this was a really good episode for that. And primarily because it focuses mostly on him and it's not him playing off of T'Pring or Nurse Chapel. Although we start seeing a little bit of hints of him and Nurse Chapel's relationship that gets developed later. It still focuses primarily on Spock. It's also, I don't know if they said it's the very first time he ever takes control of the Enterprise, or takes charge of the Enterprise. But, I think that if not the very first time, it's certainly one of the first times that Spock does that, and he makes a big choice. So that was all very interesting. And I did enjoy a lot of the humor in this episode. I know that some people... well, I know of one in particular that complains about the fact that Modern Trek is really obsessed with the thing that the captain has to say to make the ship go. But I personally find it kind of amusing, so I liked the scene when Spock was like, I want the ship to go now. I don't know. I enjoyed that. And his interactions with the Klingons and the Bloodline and all of that. I enjoyed all of that. I just love Ethan Peck as Spock. Now this episode also does contain a trope, a classic Star Trek trope that I think was done mostly during the Next Generation Deep Space Nine era. I was going to say Voyager, but Voyager not as much because they were in the Delta Quadrant. But it's that trope where our captain or crew completely disregard orders from an admiral. An admiral says, absolutely not. You are not to engage in this mission under no circumstances. And they do it anyway. And then at the end of the episode, slappity slap on the wrist. Like, that's all I get. This one, they try to kind of explain it away by Captain April saying, well, he saved us from having to fight a war on two fronts. Because dun dun dun, the Gorn are coming, and so I think that was like their excuse for it. But I still don't love this trope. It's just still like, so basically a captain or a lieutenant or lieutenant commander who's in charge of the ship can do whatever the fuck they want. As long as everything works out in the end, just completely disregard orders and they'll just get a little slap on the wrist, and that's all. So that still bugs me a little bit. All right, so after watching this, I felt that it's either a 6 or a 7, and was kind of going back and forth. And as per usual, whenever that happens, I go down the middle. So my rewatch rating for The Broken Circle is a 6.5. That's where I landed on this, because not really quite feeling a 7 for me because of the Mabanga thing really bothered me. So I couldn't give it a 7, but felt a little better than the 6 because I enjoyed the Spock stuff. So 6.5. Now, my original rating, I could have sworn I would have given this a 7, but it turns out I gave it an 8. And not only did I give it an 8 when I first watched the episode, but I maintained that 8 at the end of the season. So I do really think that it is the fact that I just watched season 1 that the Mabanga thing coming out of complete nowhere bothers me a lot more. It just feels contrived, because they had to think of something for Mabanga to do, and they couldn't think of anything. So let's just invent this war trauma we have never mentioned before. All right. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to the next episode. All right, let's move forward to season 2, episode 2. Ad Astra per Aspera. This is the big Una trial episode that we have been building up to. And I do recall that I did not love this as much as a lot of other people did. I didn't hate it. I actually thought it was a pretty good episode overall, but there were cries of best episode of the series, one of the best episodes in Modern Trek, etc., and I never went that far with it. Like I thought it was a touch overrated. I didn't think it was quite like one of the greatest things since sliced bread or anything like that. I thought it was pretty good, but I had some issues with it. I didn't necessarily remember all of the issues that I had when I entered this rewatch, so I was like, well, let me come in with fresh eyes and see if those same issues pop up again. I do remember that this episode automatically starts at a disadvantage because it's a courtroom episode. I think that is a trope that has been done to death in Star Trek and very rarely done well. Measure of the Man is the standard setter for that trope for me. And very few episodes have ever lived up to that. In fact, some of them are quite bad. So having to like overcome the trial trope, I guess I should call it, has been done way too many times in Star Trek and generally not done well. So it starts off with that. Now, as far as trial episodes go, I've always thought it was an above average one. But I did have issues. So in rewatching this episode, actually was feeling really good about it. Both I was like, this is actually a really good episode. It actually is a trial episode. Even though we know what the outcome is going to be, obviously she's going to get out of this. because she's a main character. And I remember Sean Ferrick from Trek Culture complaining, and I think he will still bring this up, like complaining to death that the trailer for season 2 showed Una in future episodes so that we know that she got off. I didn't need to see that in the trailer. I could have told you she was going to get off because it's Star Trek. I've watched Star Trek for a while. And I know we don't know Una's future, so they could, in theory, have ended her time on the Enterprise right here and put her in prison. But to me, there was 0% chance they were ever going to do that. So I'm not worried about that. That's part of the trial. That's part of, I think, the issues I have with the trial episodes is we know they're getting off. But this episode, I think, was able to overcome that with the intrigue that they were able to inject into this trial. And let's be honest, the real life commentary. You could use this, you could view this as a metaphor for any kind of bigotry or oppression. But a lot of the terminology, the words they use, the phrases that they use, it's very clear that this is a metaphor for how LGBTQ people are treated. There's a lot of talk of, people not wanting to be, not allowed to be themselves in public and try to hide who they are and all those sorts of things that invokes the oppression of LGBTQ people more than anything else. And I thought it was really well done. And of course, being a trans woman myself, really appreciated what they did there. And I thought that it worked really, really well. And then we get to that ending scene or towards the end, where I can never remember her name. Una's lawyer has that really badass thing that she does where she puts Una on the stand, and then she gets out, reads the rule book about asylum and what it takes for a person to ask for asylum. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I do recall that I was bothered by the fact that they showed the little flashbacks of Una saying things, because felt a little heavy-handed, like we didn't need that. But I wasn't bothered by it this time. That was fine. I didn't mind that. So I watched that and I was like, wait, what was it that I didn't like? I can't remember. And then the Vulcan Admiral comes up and I was like, oh, right. This is what really, really bothered me. First of all, he is a mustache twirly as fuck villain. And in my head, I'm actually picturing him with a goatee. I don't think he does have a goatee, but when I remember this episode, I picture him with a goatee because that's how, what kind of villain he was. I also just find it annoying when they do that to Vulcans, because they say that they have no emotions, or they're not driven by their emotions. But when they have an evil Vulcan like that, they're just completely, he's 1,000,000% emotion driven. And it's like, and that is why Measure of a Man is better. I know everyone has different opinions. That is why, in my opinion, Measure of a Man is far superior, because Bruce Maddox, in the end, changes his mind and sees Data as an actual sentient being, and in fact becomes pen pals with him later, and it changes his whole career. Whereas this guy, nothing was ever going to change his mind, because he was like, so there's that. But the scene where he brings up Captain Pike, and the lawyer says, objection, there's no relevance. And in any reality, in any courtroom, that should be objection sustained. Captain Pike is not on trial here. End of it. So I found it very, very contrived that they allowed that. It was like, let's add more tension. Dun, dun, dun. Now Captain Pike is in trouble too. But there's zero chance that they ever should have allowed that. Never, ever. There's no way that should have been allowed. So it felt just super contrived. What I will say, though, is that in my rewatch, I was a little more forgiving of it because, okay, they did need it for the plot, because when Una's lawyer goes through the steps of asking for asylum, she points out, well, Una asked Captain Pike, and Captain Pike granted it. So we did kind of need that in there. And the reason why that makes it a little better for me is because the plot contrivance was for a purpose rather than simply just to raise the tension and go, oh, da, 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 which is how I perceived it originally, is that they just put that in there, that thing that makes no sense, that they put it in there just to raise the tension. And that was part of it, but they also did need it for the plot to work. So I'm like, okay, I'll be a little more forgiving on it. So after my rewatch, I decided that my rating out of 10 for Ad Astra per Aspera is a 9. So yeah, I think that still not like the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's one of the stronger episodes of the season and the series. Now I'll have to look at my Modern Track Top 25. I am going to redo my Modern Track Top 25 after Strange New Worlds Season 3 so that I can include episodes from seasons that aired after I did my last one. And I'll also relook another episode. I'll relook at this one and see if it will crack it. Last time it was an honorable mention. So I don't know. It's a 9 out of 10. So my previous ratings, my very first rating was an 8. And then I had warmed up to it by the end of the season because I had given it an 8.5. So if you look at the progression here, I started with an 8. At the end of the season, I went to an 8.5. And here we are 2 years later, it's up to a 9. I don't think it's ever going to go up higher than a 9. But I think that is where I'm at with it right now. All right. Now let's go ahead and move on to episode 30. Okay, now we're in season 2, episode 3, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And I do recall that when I very first saw this title, it was like, time travel. I mean, anytime they have the word tomorrow or yesterday or time in an episode title, it's time travel. There's one with the word time in the title. I believe it's episode 5 for season 3. And I'm like, time travel. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll do something different and it won't be about time travel. But it's about time travel. Come on. Anyways, we're not talking about that episode. We're talking about this episode, season 2, episode 3, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which features Paul Wesley returning as Kirk for the second time in an alternate timeline. So this is, we have yet to meet Prime Timeline Kirk, except for that one scene at the very end of the episode. We finally do get to meet him. This is an episode that I know that I loved. And I loved it more than I would say the average viewer, although I definitely came across others who felt similarly to me, that felt that this was one of the best episodes of the series. And it did make my Modern Track top 10, although we'll see if it still does. But it's definitely still going to be in the top 25. It may slip out of the top 10 when I redo my Modern Track top 25. It is an episode that I thought very, very highly of. And the primary reason I felt this way is because of the chemistry between Luann and Kirk. And the character story for Luann in this one, I found to be a lot more interesting than her story from Memento Mori last season. Well, I did enjoy that. I did like that. There was a lot more in that episode that made that a great episode for me. It wasn't driven by her character arc. I find this, her vulnerability, her feeling comfortable being vulnerable for the first time, finding someone where she feels like she can open up for the first time, at least that we've seen on screen. I found that was very interesting because we're seeing a side of her that we hadn't previously seen. She's a person who's very bottled up, very closed up. And we haven't really seen her be vulnerable before. So I really like that. And the chemistry between these actors and these characters was just chef's kiss, just absolutely fantastic. And then the time travel story was absolutely fantastic as well. I have said before that it reminds me of, and it's not anywhere near as good as, so don't misunderstand me, but it reminds me of City on the Edge of Forever. It's in that same sort of ballpark because a character has to make a really tough decision and do something they don't want to do in order to save the timeline, which was, in her case, allowing Khan to live. So it's kind of the reverse City on the Edge of City on the Edge of Forever, because she's not having to kill someone who's good, she has to allow someone who's bad to live. But again, City on the Edge of Forever, nothing will ever touch that. It was my number one, spoiler alert, on my Star Trek Top 100. Nothing will ever touch it. So I'm not saying it's anywhere near as good as it. I'm saying it's in the same realm of storytelling. It's similar, and I like that. Now I know that there have been complaints about the Khan thing. You know, Khan has kind of been done to death. I will say that I take issue with, like others have, with the fact that Luann goes by Noonien Singh. Because do you really know a lot of people walking around with the name Hitler? Because if that is their name, they would change it. So at some point down the line, someone in that family would have changed the name. I don't think there's any way she would still have that name. So it's kind of a contrivance that she even has that name in the first place. But that's not really something I can assign to this particular episode. That's just something they did with that character. That's a character choice they made, and it's something that I've ultimately made my peace with. It's just like, whatever. There's also the issue of the fact that everyone knows that name now. When you go back to Space Seed, like Spock and Kirk had to like Google it, like, oh, who is this Khan Noonien Singh person? And Spock had to explain it, like, oh, it was a thing called the Eugenic Wars, and like everybody didn't just know it. But in that case, like, that's a retcon that the entire Star Trek universe has done, and it is a well-deserved retcon because it makes a lot more sense that everybody would have heard of Khan and would have heard of the Eugenic Wars than the way that it was portrayed in Space Seed. But when they did Space Seed, they had no idea that it was going to turn into a movie, and like it was going to come back in all these different episodes across all these different shows. They had no idea. So I understand why Space Seed did it that way, and I understand why it needs to be retconned. So I have no problem with any of that. And I know people are kind of tired of the Khan thing, and I can feel that. I can understand that, empathize with that. But as long as it works for the story and it tells a really good story, I don't mind it. I thought that doing the whole, speaking of Hitler again, doing the whole if you could kill Hitler as a baby conundrum thing here, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it worked very well. And the fact that it does tie in personally to Luann, even though, yes, it is silly that she would still have that name, but the fact that it does have that personal connection for her, and she does have that opportunity to go and live a life outside of time, and where she would be free of that, that would be very tempting for her. I thought that was very, very powerful. So this was a very effective episode. I think the one thing that bugged me on my rewatch was that I don't think I was able to overlook the corniness of the villain as much as I was before. I was like, oh, this story with Luann and the chemistry she has with Kirk is so great that I'm going to overlook how cheesy the villain is. But this time I wasn't able to as much. So my rating out of 10 after my rewatch is a 9. So when I originally watched it, I also gave it a 9. But then at the end of the season, I was like, this is a 10. You know what? Screw that villain. This is a 10, and I gave it a 10. And that's why it landed in my top 10 of Modern Trek. But so now it's circled back around again. It went from a 9 to a 10, and now it's back around to a 9 again. If I do another rating for this, maybe it'll change again. But I like a 9. After this recent viewing of it, a 9 seems pretty fair. I love it, but that villain, a little much. All right. That's it for episode 3. Now we can move on to episode 4. All right, now we can move on to season 2, episode 4, Among Lotus Eaters. So this episode is fine. It's not offensive. It has a trope that I've complained about before, which is the amnesia trope. But it does it in a way that's not offensive. What really bugs me is when they have like the character who like forgets who they are and goes off and lives a whole completely other life, and then like just completely forgets who they are the whole episode. I don't know. I just saw that so many times when I was younger in various shows. And the Paradise Syndrome in the original series is one of my least favorite episodes. I believe it was number 3 in my least favorite episode list. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's the racism, but also because I can't stand that trope. But this one was more similar to the Next Generation episode, The Conundrum, where multiple people have the amnesia. And I thought it played well into Pike's story. I'm starting to enjoy at this point in the season, really starting to enjoy Pike's relationship with Captain Battelle. Which, by the way, her name is Captain Battelle. I was today years old when I learned that. I've been calling her Captain Patel with a P this whole time. I even did a video where in the corner of the screen I wrote "Save Captain Patel" and spelled it with a P, and no one said anything to me. But I just read on IMDb it's spelled with a B. I'm blown away. So anyway, Captain Battelle, Marie, as we can also call her, her and Pike. We saw them, of course, in season 1, and she was sort of introduced as what I thought was just going to be a throwaway character in episode 1 of season 1, and we weren't really going to see her again. But come season 2, they really start developing that relationship a lot more, starting with episode 2, where there's a lot of tension because she has to be the lawyer prosecuting Una. And there's a lot of interesting interactions with them there, and that's a real challenge on their relationship. And then here, they have that fight at the beginning, but it's his love for her that kind of brings him back down to earth and is able to bring him back within himself. And I thought that was really cute. I thought that was really cool also. I really like that. I think that's my favorite aspect of this episode. I don't know. I'm a little mixed on the whole Ortegas thing. I'm glad she finally gets to do something, but like, I don't know, the I fly the ship thing. Some people really hated that. I wouldn't say that I'm in that category, but it's a little corny. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, a lot of this, what's in this episode to me, is just fine. They do another old Star Trek trope where a previous crew member, or in some cases like a previous Starfleet captain, maybe who wasn't on the same ship as our crew. I'm thinking of like the dude from the original series episode. Blanking on the name, that crappy episode with the American flag and all that. There was the captain who went to that planet, whatever. Stuff like that, where someone, or the Hitler, I keep bringing up Hitler for some reason, the Nazi episode from the original series, where it was that scientist who was from the Federation who was left behind there and changed the society and stuff like that. So something we've seen before, and it's okay if it's done well. I don't usually think it is done well, and here I didn't particularly love this character. I thought he was kind of annoying. So yeah, there's a lot to just kind of meh about this episode for me. But the Pike and Captain Battelle thing is what really brings it up. So I watched this episode, and to me, this was just felt so average. So when you think of average in terms of ratings and grades, 70% is a C, 70% equals 7 out of 10. So to me, this is a 7 all the way. I was certain that I had originally given it a 7 as well. Turns out I gave it an 8. I don't know. I guess a lot of times when I watch these episodes, like I'm kinder to them when I first watch them than I am upon reflection. Because not only did I give it an 8 when I first watched it, but I maintained the 8 at the end of the season. It's very similar to the Broken Circle. I'm very surprised that I had rated it that high, because to me this was like 7 all the way. It has 7 written all over it. Very average episode. All right, and that's all I have to say about this one. Let's move on to the dreaded episode 5. All right, now we're on to season 2, episode 5, Charades. Right, I get to talk about this one. So here's the thing, like, seems like a lot of people love this episode. I remember seeing certain YouTubers review it when it came out and just glowing about it. And I looked at IMDb recently, and it is rated an 8.2, which earns it the top rated designation. So a lot of people like this episode. A lot of people even love this episode. And to be fair, I think the reason why I am not one of those people, and the reason why I am, in fact, the exact opposite, that I hate this episode and put it in my Modern Track top 5 worst episode list. This is one of the 5 worst episodes in all of Modern Track for me. And I think that the reason for that is that I'm going to guess that a lot of those people who really love it, or if not all of them who really love it, probably were not raised in the 80s binging nonstop sitcoms for their entire childhood, like just sitcom after sitcom after sitcom that came out in the 70s and 80s. Because when you do that, you start seeing a lot of the same tropes over and over and over. The amnesia trope, as I mentioned before, is one of those, but that wasn't just limited to sitcoms. That was in a lot of different things. But there are certain tropes that you just see over and over and over again, and they start to become really irritating after a while. And I start feeling like, I don't think I ever found these tropes funny. Although the truth is, when I was a little kid, I may have found some of them funny. But as far as I can remember now, I never found any of these tropes funny at all. And so then when I see them in this kind of context, in a serious Star Trek episode, it just irritates me to no end. And when I see these kind of jokes that they do, I would call them actively unfunny. This is a term that I've used when something is, it's not that it's just not funny, but the attempt at the humor actively irritates me and grates on my nerves. Just the very attempt at that humor, like, just actively annoys me. So that's what I call actively unfunny. And so I can just tell you straight off 3 different sitcom tropes that they use. There's, of course, the classic meet the parents trope, which wasn't just limited to sitcoms. They made an entire movie series called Meet the Parents. And actually, I thought the original Meet the Parents movie was not the worst thing ever, but I still don't like this trope. That's the trope, of course, where one character is meeting their boyfriend or girlfriend's parents, and one of the parents is really overbearing, and that's supposed to create comedy. And whether the parent is a mother or a father has varied across different shows and movies. Of course, in Meet the Parents, it's the father, um, but in a lot of cases, it's the mother. And usually, in like sitcom fashion and realistic fiction, or I should say, non-sci-fi is not realistic, but um, fiction that's based in the real world rather than in a sci-fi setting. It's usually a Jewish mother, if I'm being real. Um, and whenever it is the mother, they almost always have a father character who is goofy and lovable, who's actually really nice, but is obviously just caving to whatever his wife wants to do. Um, and that's one thing in a sitcom, but you're gonna do that with Vulcans. I'm sorry, but that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen. Like this Vulcan woman who is so hard on the core about logic, and Spock, you're not logical enough, and her husband is the least logical Vulcan in the universe. And the reason why he is that way is so he can fit in this stupid fucking trope where the husband has to be lovable and laughable and like go along with whatever the wife says to provide comedy. Actively unfunny, grates on my nerves. This bugs me so much. And what bugs me even more about this isn't even the first time Star Trek has done this. It was in the Deep Space Nine episode. Let he who's without no, not let he without sin. What was it? Was the marriage one? Uh, um, these episode titles that I can't remember, I'll look them up and you'll see them flash across the screen. It's not Let He Was Without Sin. It was the one where Dax and Worf got married. You'll see the episode title on the screen. I don't know why I'm blanking on episode titles right now. Anyways, and that one, also overbearing mother-in-law, and it wasn't even really Worf's mom. It was like his adopted mom. It was like Martok's wife, and it was so irritating. I hate that episode too. And then another trope that we have is the thing where Spock, gets turned into a human, but of course a really important thing is happening and he has to pretend. Now, in sitcoms and stuff, it would normally be like their hair got turned a crazy color, or they accidentally shaved their head or cut their hair in a crazy way and have to wear hats to cover it, or or something along those lines. It would be something that they're trying to cover up like that. And I'm trying to think of these specific examples. I can't think of any, but I know that I've seen this a million times, where it will be something along those lines that they're trying to cover up. And of course, there's a very important situation that's coming up where they have to impress someone, or they might be going to an important job interview, or or something along those lines, and it's supposed to create hijinks. Which, by the way, I also want to point out that the reason why Spock Amok is better than this, or one of the reasons, is because they called out the hijinks. I said in my season 1 review that I appreciated that they did that. I liked how they put that into the show, where Spock was like, "Oh, we are heading into hijinks territory here." Here they want us to take it as face value. They're taking themselves way too seriously while they do these ridiculous hijinks. And then the last trope is when Pike said, "Oh, let's play charades," like the thing where somebody's got to stall something, so they try to do some uncomfortable thing that is supposed to make people laugh. Blah blah blah. Actively unfunny. Actively. Lastly, the thing that bugs the shit out of me about this episode is how they just completely undermined all the build up and the establishment of T'Pring's and Spock's relationship that they did in season 1. It was set up across 2 different episodes. It's a very dynamic relationship where they face challenges and they're able to overcome those challenges. And here, it felt like another one of those challenges, similar to what they went through in season 1, but T'Pring just completely like abandons him and like gives up. Like, well, no, I think we should take a break. And yes, I do understand that in canon and the original series, T'Pring does dump him, but that is like still a good 6 or 7 years away at this point. You have plenty of time to build to that, and I had always assumed after season 1 that they were going to gradually build to that until we get to the end of the series. So it would gradually go from this really good dynamic relationship to what we ultimately end up with in the original series. Whereas here, it wasn't gradual at all. It was like, let's just ditch this storyline so that we can now focus on Spock and Chapel instead. So that bugged the shit out of me. I thought it didn't make a lot of sense, especially having just watched season 1 and seeing those episodes, to see that just completely thrown under the bus and like, oh, I think that we should take a break all of a sudden now, even though what we're going through now is not any more challenging than what we did in season 1. But the writers want to focus on Spock and Chapel instead. So let's just move on. That fucks the shit out of me. So my rating out of 10, I'm going to give it a very generous 2. Like, I'll give it a 2. And actually, I can't even remember my logic for not giving it a 1. I want to give it a 1. But when I decided on a 2, it was like, okay, there's one thing that I liked. Oh, you know what it was? It was Spock's mother. I did like the way that Spock stood up for her, and I liked that they developed that relationship. So that's what saves it from being a 1. That's what makes it a 2. So this is an episode that has gradually gone down in rating over time. So when I first watched it, I actually gave it an extremely kind 6. And then at the end of the season, I lowered it to a 5. But later that year in 2023 is when I did my Modern Track Top 25. And though I did not rate it, I decided to include it in my top 5 worst. So I think it's suffice to say that at that point, I was no longer thinking of it as a 5 rating anymore. So I think I'd already probably lowered it to something like a 2 in my mind at that point. So it's not a sudden drop from a 5 to a 2. I think that I had already decided that by the end of the calendar year 2023. And with my rewatch, like, this episode enrages me. Like, I never want to see it again. I love that some of you love this. I love that for you. I cannot stand it and never want to see it again. And I don't want to talk about it anymore. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, now we are on to season 2, episode 6, Lost in Translation. So this is one that I definitely remember liking more than the average viewer. It currently has a 7.3 rating on IMDb, which is not terrible, but it is among the lower episode ratings in Strange New Worlds. And I do recall that a lot of people were lukewarm on this episode. I love this episode. I've always have loved this episode. I think it's because I really, really love Celia Rose Gooding as Uhura, and I talked about her in my season 1 review when I got to Children of the Comet. That I really find it fascinating how they're really developing this character who was tragically underdeveloped in the original series, unfortunately. So I love the depth that they're bringing to this character, and this is another step in that journey. And I really appreciated how they brought back Hemmer and that tie that she had to Hemmer, and how important he was to her. That they did bring that back in season 2. That they didn't just pretend like that wasn't a thing. There was another really impactful storyline from season 1 that they decided not to mention anymore, and I will get to that in a little bit later on in this video that pertains to a different episode. But in order to move this character forward in a linear way, I think you do have to include that. And I thought it was absolutely beautiful how they ended it with the aliens taking the form of Hemmer and smiling when she did it well, when she did the things she was supposed to do. I got a little tear. I really really appreciated that a lot. I thought it was very sweet. Um, I also really enjoyed the interactions between Kirk and Ahura, because this is another relationship that was it was a thing that was underdeveloped in the original series, um, but um, you can kind of read between the lines and see that yes, Kirk and Ahura would have had a really strong bond, even though we don't get to see it on screen as much as I would have liked in the original series. So I like that they're adding that depth to that relationship, showing us the first time that they met. Now I will say the first meeting of Kirk and Spock was a little bit much. Again, as a kid of the 80s, I remember watching WWE wrestling. It might have even still been called WWF wrestling at the time, where Hulk Hogan and Randy Macho Man Savage became friends for the first time, and they would go on stage and do this thing where they would shake hands and go like build up and like, like so they would do this thing like to do this really dramatic handshake. Kirk and Spock, while not exaggerated to that level, it felt like that to me. But I forgive it. It's fine. it's fine. Whatever. um, the Kirk and Uhura relationship, though, worked beautifully. I thought that the chemistry, again, Paul Wesley. I love Paul Wesley as Kirk. I'm sorry for the haters, but I love him. I do actually. I want to take uh, a moment to talk about Paul Wesley as Kirk. I do understand that a lot of people don't like his portrayal of Kirk, and I will never convince you otherwise because that's your opinion and it's a valid opinion. Um, but what I will say is, if you don't like Paul Wesley as Kirk, just say you don't like Paul Wesley as Kirk. I I've heard some people, and well, there's one YouTuber in particular, but also just in general, like reviews that I've read and comments that I've seen. So it's not just one person; it's like a variety of people that complain about. Well, doesn't Kirk have his own ship? Um, like implying that it doesn't make sense for him to be on the Enterprise all the time because he should have his own ship and his own duties. Well, would it surprise you to learn that in the 20 episodes of Strange New Worlds so far, we have seen the prime timeline Kirk leave the Farragut to go to the Enterprise out of 20 episodes twice, two times. So what is this? Doesn't he have his own ship thing? Now I do get that a lot of that comes from seeing the season 3 trailer as well, and we see Kirk pop up in the trailer a bunch. But from what I can tell, and we don't really know until we watch season 3, but all I can see is two distinct episodes that Kirk appears in season 3. One is the holodeck episode. One is the one where he, for whatever reason, becomes captain of the Enterprise. Those are two episodes. And maybe he does appear in more. We don't know yet. But even if he does appear in 3 episodes in season 3, that's still like 5 episodes out of 30. So if you're saying, well, doesn't he have his own ship? Are you also saying that about Captain Batel? Because she actually leaves her ship to go to the Enterprise way more than Kirk does. And I know she has a relationship with Pike, but she's the captain. And why did they make her the prosecutor in a freaking trial? Doesn't she have her own ship? like, and personally, I'm not bothered by Captain Patel being the prosecutor in that trial because it worked really well for the story. I'm not bothered by Captain Patel always going over to the Enterprise when she should be captaining her own ship because it works well for the story. Same reason I am not bothered by Captain Kirk or Lieutenant Kirk, I should say, in this phase, going to the Enterprise twice so far, and perhaps 2 more times in season 3 out of 30 episodes. I'm not bothered by that because it works for the story, and I like Paul Wesley as Captain Kirk. So I think the people who are saying, doesn't he have his own ship? They just don't like Paul Wesley as Captain Kirk. So just say that. Just say you don't like him because you don't, and that's fine. That's your opinion. I disagree, but that's your opinion. Um, anyways, I am not. You will never hear me doing the "doesn't he have his own ship" thing. That's my personal opinion. I like Paul Wesley's Kirk interacting with our characters. Now, if he were like in all 10 episodes, maybe I would be like, okay, you're laying it on a little thick. But I don't think that he is. He's going to be in season 3. Um, anyways. So after my rewatch of this episode, I really enjoyed it. I didn't feel like it was quite a 9. So I landed on a rewatch rating of 8.5. And I thought that I was matching its original rating, which it was. So the original rating was an 8.5, but I did raise it up to a 9. I think when I raised tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow up to a 10, I was like, well, this gets to go up to a 9. But not remembering any of that and just watching it with fresh eyes, it felt 8.5 all the way. So this is like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow went full circle. It started at an 8.5, went up to a 9, and it is back around to an 8.5. But that's only a half point difference anyway, so who cares? Anyways, we can now move on to the delightful episode 7. Okay, now I can move on to season 2, episode 7, Those Old Scientists. This, of course, is the now classic crossover between Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks. And there was a time, though, where I was a little anxious about this episode because they had really hyped up this crossover. And I was thinking at the time, I don't know if that's a great idea to hype it up that much. I almost think that they should have kept this more of a secret. Um, maybe have a little bit more under the radar in case it flops, that we don't get our expectations set too high. And I was trying to keep my expectations in check because of that. But as it turns out, not only was this episode worth the hype, but it actually exceeded any expectations I had. And I think a lot of people would say the same. I knew that it would be funny. Like, I had no doubt because Lower Decks is funny. Tawny Newsome is funny. Jack Quaid is funny. Their chemistry is funny. So I had no doubt that it would be funny. And it was. And I especially love how they carried over the same humor from Lower Decks, and it was called out. That's one of my favorite parts, is when they're kind of talking to each other, and Mariner says to Boimler, "I thought you might have been stuck in some dystopian San Francisco past." And of course, making a reference to past tense. The Deep Space Nine episode, and Una saying, have you noticed that the references are oddly specific? And Spock going, indeed. Um, that I expected it to be funny. I did. I didn't expect the Strange New World crew to be as funny as they were, to fit in with um, our Lower Decks characters as well as they did. But I knew it would be funny. What really kind of blindsided me and really hit me hard in a really good way was that Lower Decks heart, that Lower Decks sweetness. I think that's an underrated aspect of Lower Decks. Not for people who love it, but for people who maybe are a little iffy on Lower Decks or maybe don't like Lower Decks. I think the connection between the characters and the camaraderie between the characters and the friendships. There are a lot of Lower Decks episodes that really have sweet endings because it's the friendships that save the day, and they do that in a non-cheesy way. Like, they do it in a way that feels real and grounded in like a way that real people would interact with each other. That's Lower Decks. I didn't necessarily expect that would carry over to this episode, at least not to the level that it does. I feel like I'm kind of just repeating everything I probably said in my previous review of this episode, my previous reviews, because I've talked about this episode a couple different times. This, by the way, was number 3 in my modern track top 25. If you want to have an inkling of how highly I think of this episode, um, but yes, some examples of course, Mariner connecting with Uhura, and surprisingly, that Pike scene when Pike is chewing out Mariner and Boimler, and it turns into a really kind of sweet moment, and the Boimler is the one who's actually giving advice to Pike, and it works. It really works. It's believable. Um, those are the aspects that I was not expecting. Also, I just have to say, it was just such a joy to see Jack Quaid and Tawny Newsome get to play these characters in the flesh. It's definitely different than their animated versions, but I did really enjoy seeing them, and I'm sure they had a blast playing them. There's also, as Lord X is wont to do, a lot of observations, self-deprecating humor, particularly the line when Boimler and Mariner are talking to each other, and like, you notice how everybody talks so quietly, and yeah, so slowly, because that's one of the complaints of Lower Decks for people who don't like it, especially like how loud and fast they talk, because it's a cartoon. But I thought that was a nice touch. Just little things like that, just all throughout. This was just so good, so good. Um, Now, I do want to talk about the Spock storyline here, because I have yet to touch on the Spock and Chapel romance. I'm sure that I'll come back to this, but when I first watched season 2, I was very much against the Spock and Chapel romance because we don't see it in the original series. It seems to be very, very far off from canon because we see Nurse Chapel like like a puppy dog, like staring at Spock all the time, and but Spock has no feelings for her whatsoever. So it felt like a huge retcon to have this relationship, and especially at the expense of the T'Pring and Spock relationship that had developed in season 1, which was also a retcon, but it was one that really worked well because they had great chemistry together. This seemed a little forced, so I didn't like it. But what I noticed watching this episode in particular, um, in my rewatch, we have all those scenes, of course, of Spock doing those goofy smiles and Boimler freaking out. By the way, I forgot to mention, I love the Boimler scream. We get the Boimler scream in this episode. Boimler kind of freaking out because he's worried that he's changed the past. Um, and then, Nurse Chapel tells him, no, it's nothing you did. I had made him this way. And I think it's her realizing that Spock is destined to go back to his normal logical self, and that this short-lived experiment is just that. It's short-lived. He's not going to be like this. That he is destined to go back to his logical self. And the main part have led to her decision to leave because she knew that it was destiny. So in a way, Boimler did kind of affect the past, but it's kind of a more of a whatever happened scenario going on here, because this is what had already occurred. So I think that in doing this, the episode is telling us, oh no, don't worry, we're not messing with canon. Spock is still going to be the Spock that we see in the original series, played by Leonard Nimoy, who is completely stoic, completely logical, does not express his emotions. And this is just another step in the evolution of Spock, getting us toward that, which made me appreciate it a little bit more, made me appreciate Spock's character development a little bit more. But this is the show telling us, oh no, don't worry, we're not breaking canon. This is still his path. This is still where Spock is heading. And I didn't think of it that way when I first saw it, but upon my rewatch, it made me think of that. Actually makes me hate the Chapel and Spock relationship a little less. It's still not my favorite thing, but I hate it a little less. I've also come up with a fan-splaining explanation of how this could end up fitting into canon, and I don't know if this is the route they're going. But getting back to that ceremony that Spock has yet to undergo, that's supposed to purge him of all of his emotions and make him super logical. It's the one they mentioned in the Serene Squall. Does that perhaps come with some sort of memory block? Especially when it pertains to love that you might have felt for another person. So maybe um, Spock loses his memory that he had those feelings in Nurse Chapel, and that's what we see in the original series is Nurse Chapel relishing something that she had in the past that's gone forever, and Spock not even being aware of that thing that they had in the past. Now, obviously, that is not what they had in mind when they wrote the original series back in the 60s. However, it would fit. And so maybe that's the direction they're going. I don't know. Right now, that's just fan fiction, fan-splaining, as I like to call it. But that could be the direction that they're going. I don't know. So overall, I do hate the Chapel and Spock relationship less than I did before. Still not my favorite, and this will come back up again in a couple more episodes. All right, let's go ahead and talk about my ratings. So this, of course, is a 10, an absolute 10. As I said, it's number 3 on my Modern Track Top 25, the third best episode in all of Modern Track for me. So fantastic episode. I originally gave it a 9, and then I bumped it back up to a 10 a week later. I didn't even wait till the end of the season. At the beginning of my episode 8 review, I came on, hey, I gave it a 9. No, that's wrong. I'm giving it a 10. So within a week, I had bumped it up to a 10. And as I explained in that video, I think it was because I watched it at 3 in the morning. I was tired, and I didn't really process it well, and I was like, I don't know if this is a 10. And then as soon as I thought on it more, it became a 10. And at this stage, it's a 12. If you can go that high, it is one of the best episodes in Modern Trek, and clearly the greatest crossover episode ever done in Star Trek. So I almost thought about sweeping that 9 under the rug and pretending like I never gave it, but I did, just very briefly. But this now is a 10. And now we can move on to episode 8. All right, we are now up to season 2, episode 8, Under the Cloak of War. So for the second consecutive season, we have an episode 8 that features M'Benga. This time we are focusing on his war trauma from the Klingon War that was suddenly invented out of absolute nowhere back in episode 1. So I don't like this episode for several reasons. There is the fact that this storyline is coming out of nowhere, and it's not just that. It's that last season we really focused on M'Benga's daughter and um, the loss of his daughter and him having to let her go and accept that, and I got a little tear in my eye. This season, no mention of that at all. It's as if it never happened. So that storyline has now been replaced with this war trauma storyline. Whereas if you're going to do it, if you're going to do both of those, they need to be blended a little more in order to make this feel like a more fully fleshed out character, rather than one character who experiences one characteristic after the other. Like, okay, this characteristic is done. We're never mentioning it again. We're now going to invent this brand new characteristic that we've never mentioned before. And we're just going to have one characteristic after the other, rather than more of a blend. So that would have involved them even hinting at M'Benga's trauma in season 1, even if they're not going deep into it, just like at least acknowledging his existence. And then in season 2, acknowledging that Mabanga had this experience last season where he had to give up his daughter, just even a couple lines here and there. And that's what I was referring to in my episode 6 review when I'm talking about how I was appreciative of how they showed that Himmer's death still had an impact on Ahura, whereas for Mabanga, they're not showing at all that his daughter had any impact on him at all. They're acting like that never happened because now they're moving on to a different thing. And that's not good storytelling. That's not good character development. If you want to develop a fully fleshed out character, he needs to have both of those things. You can focus on one in season 1 and another in season 2, but they both need to be ever present. So, as much as I dislike the Klingon war trauma thing, I do hope that it is referenced in season 3, not focused on, but referenced. You can move on to something else with Mabanga, but you gotta at least reference the fact that he had this war trauma, and please reference his daughter in season 3, so that we know that he's experiencing all of these things. I don't want it to be all of a sudden in season 3 the Klingon thing is gone and replaced with Mabanga being obsessed with 20th century boxing. That's a reference to Voyager. A really terrible episode of Voyager. Like out of nowhere, all of a sudden he likes boxing. No, let's do better character development than that. That's one reason I don't like this. Also, I feel that it's going for that dark tone, like the Deep Space Nine tone. There's a couple problems with it. One, especially watching these episodes consecutively, it feels very out of place, sandwiched between a very lighthearted Those Old Scientists and a very lighthearted Subspace Rhapsody. It feels very poorly placed. But also, I don't think they do a particularly good job of doing the dark Deep Space Nine thing. I think they kind of suck at it. They're nowhere near as good. And it kind of evoked for me the Deep Space Nine episode Duet, which also has a previous war criminal coming back, or so we think, anyways. And one of the characters has a problem with it, and they have these interactions. And so it kind of reminded me of a Duet. And it's unfortunate that it reminded me of Duet because this is like not even one billionth as good as Duet. Like it just doesn't even come close. It's a massive failure in what it's trying to accomplish. So it's I just don't think it does a very good job on what it's trying to do. And lastly, I will say this episode is just flat out boring, especially the flashbacks. I do appreciate that they're finally showing us Mabanga and Chapel's war experience rather than just telling. We're actually, I think they did need to do some flashbacks to show that to us. So it's a show and not tell. I appreciate the effort, but they're boring as fuck. And I watched my original review for this, and at that time I said that, oh, it drags at times. It's a little boring at times. But on my rewatch, I'm like, no, this is just flat out boring. Not just at times. It's just flat out boring. But, you know, it could be worse. So I am going to go ahead and give it my rating out of 10. I'm going to give it a 5. Might be a little generous, but less generous than what I originally gave it. It was actually a 7 when I first watched it, went down to a 6 at the end of the season, and now we're down at a 5. Maybe in another couple of years it'll be down to a 4. Yeah, it's just not one of my favorite episodes. Okay, so now we get to move on to everyone's favorite episode, Sarcasm. Episode 9. Now we move on to Season 2, Episode 9, Subspace Rhapsody. Why am I singing? So here's the episode where it's appropriate to sing. The episode about singing the infamous musical episode, Subspace Rhapsody. And I will say, I believe this is one of the most divisive episodes of Star Trek. Maybe not quite Tuvix level divisive, but it's divisive insofar as there are a lot of people who love this episode and a lot of people who hate this episode with a passion. Um, the people who love this episode, I've heard them talk about like just how much they love the songs, how the songs get stuck in their head, how delightful it was, and how just joyous and wonderful and just what an enjoyable episode it is for them, and they love all the songs and singing along. And the people who hate the episode detest the very idea that Star Trek should even do a musical episode in the first place. So I've heard both ends of the spectrum, and where I fall on that spectrum is kind of in the middle. And I don't really know a lot of other people who are. I feel like anyone that I've heard comment on this episode is on one end or the other. I think the haters are a little bit more numerous, especially if you look at IMDb. It's got a 6.8 rating, which is, I think, the second or third lowest rating in Strange New Worlds and lowest rating in season 2. So the haters are there's a little bit more of them, but there are people who absolutely love this episode. And for me, I don't detest the idea of Star Trek doing a musical episode. I have an open mind about it. If you want to do a musical episode, all right, let me see what you got. Give me a musical episode. Let's see if you can pull it off. That's how I view it. But I also don't agree with the people who absolutely love this and thought that this was a really good musical, because I didn't think it was a really good musical. I thought it was an okay or average musical at best. So that's kind of where I am at it with it. And my biggest complaint is that the songs, most of them aren't very good. I don't agree with the people who say that these are very memorable songs and they get stuck in their head and they're singing them over and over again. I guess my brain is just maybe wired differently than those people. So it's nobody's fault or anything. It's just maybe a difference in how we think. But none of those songs are memorable at all. In fact, I just watched this episode again yesterday as I'm recording this, and all the songs are gone out of my head. I couldn't tell you how any of them go. I could maybe tell you some of the lyrics. Like I know that Pike and Battelle had that one song, "This is a private conversation." I don't really remember the melody. I don't really remember how any of these songs go. They're very forgettable songs. So that's a problem. And also, there's too many sad songs that go on for way too long. If you're going to do a musical that's condensed into one single hour, I think you're maybe allowed one of those songs. But there were 3 of them. And the Luann one, the Luann song, I'm sorry, but it sucked. And it's not a knock on Christina Chung, who did her own vocals. She has an amazing voice. So it's nothing against her, but that song sucked and went on for way too long. And then later in the episode, we get back-to-back songs by Spock and Uhura. It just goes on forever. Now, to be fair, I think Uhura's song was more self-reflective than sad. And then it leads to her conclusion at the end of the episode. So it's not necessarily a sad song, but it's kind of a slow tempo song, and it follows immediately Spock's, crying over Nurse Chapel song, and it just went on for way too long, like having those back to back songs. So it's just too much of that. What I did like was the Nurse Chapel song in. I'm going to call it 10 Forward, but it's not 10. The bar, the lounge, whatever you want to call that place, where she's singing, and there's backup dancers, and Uhura's getting in there, and they're picking her up and lifting her. And I wanted more of that kind of thing. Like, I wanted more of, I don't know, a musical. Now, granted, that does actually play into the plot, where Uhura says that they need to amp up the musical the numbers that they're doing a little bit, and that the one that got the rated the highest on whatever that scale was the Nurse Chapel musical. So that was part of the plot, that their musical numbers were all boring. But I think they could have altered the plot a little bit, or they could have had more less boring musical numbers, and Uhura could have said, "Oh, I'm looking at this chart, and whenever we did this one or that one or this one, that's when the chart was the highest." So there could have been multiple ones besides just the Nurse Chapel one. That could have worked into the plot, but they needed better musical numbers. Is my point with this episode. If you're gonna do a musical, do a freaking musical. Star Trek. Like, this was kind of just sort of an average musical. On the positive, I do appreciate that they provided an explanation for the musical happening. It wasn't just like all of a sudden everybody starts busting out in song for no reason. Granted, it was like a gobbledygook pseudoscience technobabble nonsense thing, but a lot of Star Trek episodes are explained by that sort of thing. So just join the club when it comes to that. So I've got no problem. I appreciate that they provided an explanation, and they even provided an explanation for why we have to do a grand finale in order to get out of this. So that worked for me. I actually did like some of the storylines. I liked that we follow up with Luann and Kirk, and that Luann just flat out tells Kirk about the alternate timeline, even though that's breaking the, time travel rules or whatever. Oh, who cares about that? In Star Trek, they break that all the time. But she just flat out tells him because she was worried about like singing it, and so I like that. And then we get our first mention of Carol Marcus here. I liked that. I did like where the Spock and Chapel story is going, because now it's wrapping up. And it didn't occur to me before, but I think Chapel is going in this direction because of her conversation with Boimler. That she's realizing that, oh, wait, some shit. Spock is just going to be logical again. Although she probably would have done it without Boimler, right? I don't know. I don't want to get into temporal mechanics. But I do like that, because that shows that hopefully this romance is short-lived, and we are going to get a follow-up. We see in season 3 in the trailer that Spock is punching Dr. Corby, so I think my assumption was we're going to get some sort of time jump where Nurse Chapel is there for a while with Dr. Corby and then decides to marry him. And that's going to put it into that storyline. So I'm okay with the direction that storyline is heading. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the dancing Klingons. I like the dancing Klingons. I thought it was hilarious. I'm sorry, but that was funny. The way that they were dancing. See, that's funny. Not recycled sitcom tropes that I've seen a gazillion times that don't make any sense in the context of the episode that they were in. This makes sense in that context. And I even like how the Klingon was like, "Oh, this dishonor," and he was like, "No," and he was like trying to resist it, he was trying to hold back, and then he started busting in the song that made it better. I liked it. I'm sorry. Actually, no, I'm not sorry. I unapologetically like the dancing Klingons. I think they're hilarious, and I don't care who disagrees with me. And I know that people do. A couple of them have commented on my channel before. Anyways, my rating for Subspace Rhapsody after my rewatch out of 10 is a 7. My original rating was a 7. My rating after the end of the season, although to be fair, that was only 2 weeks later, was also a 7. This is the only episode in season 2 that stayed the same rating all the way across the board. From when I first saw it to the end of the season to now, it stayed the same. This is the only one. This is straight up 7. Just to me, just kind of an okay episode. Not a terrible episode as some think, and not a fantastic episode as others think. It's right down the middle. It's a 7 out of 10 for me. Now we can wrap it up with the one last episode of season 2. All right, we've reached the final episode of season 2, and that is Hegemony Part 1. And I think we can go ahead now and add the Part 1 to the title, even though it officially is not called Part 1, it's just Hegemony. But we know that the season 3 premiere is Hegemony Part 2. So I am now calling this Hegemony Part 1 because that's what it is. So I'm glad I went back and rewatched this one before season 3. Honestly, my initial thought was, I should just go back and watch Hegemony Part 1 before I watch season 3, so that's fresh in my head. And then I was watching Trek Culture, and Sean and Ellie had seen the first 5 episodes, and they were trying to give a spoiler-free review on it. And Ellie said, one thing that I would advise is that you should go back and watch the other episodes, because I was just like, what happened? What? And after she said that, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to watch all of them. And you know what? I'm going to record videos about them. So here we are. Originally, I was only going to watch this one. And now it just turned into me watching all 20 episodes. And I'm glad I did. Anyways, so this episode is pretty good. It's really difficult to rate it without seeing part 2, which is coming out now less than a week, or less than 2 weeks. I think a week and a half, right? Yeah, a week and 2 days, something like that. Yeah, so part of me was like, maybe I shouldn't give a rewatch rating for it and just wait for part 2. But no, I originally gave a rating for it based off of only this episode. So I'm going to do a rewatch rating based off of only this episode. And then when I do my episode 3 review, or sorry, season 3, episode 1 review, which initially will be a written review, on my Facebook page, please follow me on Facebook. When I do that, then I will circle back around to this and kind of give my overall rating for the 2-parter, I think. But without knowing what is coming, I thought that this was a good setup episode. I thought that this had a lot of excitement, and I liked the cliffhanger. With Pike not knowing what to do. And initially, when I very first saw it, I wasn't sure how I felt about that, because I was like, well, Pike's a better captain than that. But then someone brought up the point that he's not a great wartime captain necessarily. And also, I would add that the stakes are even higher because he has someone he loves who is in danger, and also people who care about who are captured. But unfortunately, we've already seen what happens next, because they released that. So I know what happens in the next moment. So he'll figure it out pretty quickly. But regardless, I like the ending there. It's a good cliffhanger. It's no Mr. Warfire kind of cliffhanger, but I think it is effective as the cliffhanger. I also, as I mentioned previously, do appreciate the Pike and Captain Battelle storyline. Now, here's where I am upset about the trailer. I had mentioned earlier that I wasn't that upset about the season 2 trailers showing Una being perfectly fine because I knew she would be. But here, I thought there was a non-zero chance that Captain Patel could die, because as much as I hate when writers use female characters to forward male character stories, I could definitely see a scenario where that happens, or where they now have a Pike who's mourning about his lost love. I could definitely see a scenario where they did that, and I was worried about that happening. Not only did I not want them to do that trope that I don't like, but also I'm really enjoying the Pike and Patel relationship, as I talked about earlier, and I don't want that to end. So I'm glad she survives. Spoilers if you haven't seen the trailer, but if you've seen the trailer, she's all over the goddamn trailer. So we know she's fine. um, so I was a little bit annoyed at the trailer for showing us that, but at the same time, I'm glad she's going to be okay. And this episode, we'll just get to find out, how she's going to be okay. Or not this episode, but the next one. um, yeah, and I love the introduction of Scotty, and we do see him in the season 3 trailer. So I did say last year in my review of this episode that I hope we see more Scotty because I want him around. I think this actor does a great job of Scotty. I like the interactions that he has with Pelia. I like that Pelia is going to be like kind of his mentor. I love that. It kind of set him up, put him on the path. Pelia is going to be the one who puts him on the path to be the chief engineer. I love this. Yeah, and the Pike and Patel stuff. We did get here. The Spock and Chapel stuff was a little annoying, but I also know that it is winding down, so it's coming to an end. So that's fine. But I went back and watched my review originally for this episode, and, and I was talking about how it's so ridiculous that Chapel is apparently the only survivor of the Cayuga, or what's that called? Whatever that ship was called. And she's perfectly fine. like she's just asleep and she wakes up and she's fine. And there was apparently a reviewer last year. I mentioned this in my review, that there was some other reviewer who talked about how her hair was perfect. I don't even remember which reviewer that was, but that's a little ridiculous. So that aspect of it left a lot to be desired. But otherwise, I was on the edge of my seat. I was into it. I don't think they overdid the Gorn like they did in season 1 with that Aliens SS episode. I think they toned down the Gorn enough to my liking, to where it really had me invested in the story, whereas I was not invested in the story in that Aliens SS episode. So yeah, I quite enjoyed this episode. So after watching it on my rewatch, my gut was like, this is not quite a 9, but I feel better than an 8. So I gave it an 8.5, which, as it turns out, is a half point increase from what I had originally given it, which was an 8. And the end of the season review that I did was just less than a week after this episode aired. So, I mean, I wasn't going to change the rating in that shorter period of time. So it's just an 8. But I'm bumping it up half a point. And now we'll see what I think of it after I watch part 2. I don't think I'll change the rating of part 1 necessarily, but I may have to give an overall rating for the 2-parter, and that could certainly go down from an 8.5. And this part 2 is amazing. It could go up, but my suspicion is it will stay at 8.5 or go down for the 2-parter. But we'll see. We'll see. Coming up really, really soon now. All right. So that does it for my review of episode 10. That does it for all of my reviews. Now let me get into my rating for season 2 as a whole. All right. So after sitting through all 10 episodes of season 2 and pondering and reflecting and thinking about it, I think that I do like it a little less than I did after it first aired. Not a whole lot less, but I think a little bit less. Um, and I think it's exactly because I just watched season one right before it. So I have a direct comparison to season one. And watching them back to back, I can definitely see what was lacking in season two that I found in season one. And namely, it was the consistency of the episodes and the through lines that they had. They had better through lines in season one. One of my favorites was, of course, the Pike storyline of season one, which they concluded in spectacular fashion in the finale. I also did like the Mabanga storyline in season one. The Una storyline, we only got a little bit of it, but I did like what we got in season one. I liked Ahura's development, and that is one that does continue into season two, that is built upon in season two. But not a lot of them were built upon. And as I mentioned, the Mabanga one was kind of herky jerky. Like we just abandoned his storyline from season one completely, act like it never happened, and then invent a brand new one. So it was a little herky jerky. I did like the Luann and Kirk storyline. Did not care for the Spock and Chapel storyline, although I'm a little less hateful toward it than I was initially. It's still not my favorite. So when I look at the through lines, the continuation, the storylines that go throughout the season, in season two as compared to season one, not quite on the same level. And also just the consistent quality of the episodes. There is a 2 out of 10 rated episode in season two that and the lowest I think I ended up giving a 4 so to the Love Lift Us Up Where We Belong episode, and I will always call it that. Episode 6 of season one. So yeah, there's that. I think 2 is lower, and I just feel like there was more kind of average episodes in season 2. I don't know. So I decided that I'm going to give my rewatch rating of season 2 an 8. And I had originally given it a 9. I called it a weaker 9 than season 1, but now I'm just going to really distinguish seasons 1 and 2 from each other and just go ahead and give season 2 an 8 in my rewatch. So hopefully season 3 doesn't go down from that. Hopefully it goes back up to a 9, but we shall soon see. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I know this is a very long video. I forgot to mention that you can use the timestamps below, so hopefully you figured that out so you don't have to sit for the entire length of this video watching me yammer. Anyways, season 3 is coming up soon. I'm going to do written reviews on Facebook, so please make sure you follow Alyssa Jean's Reviews on Facebook. And then I will do a episode 1 through 5 video review. Where I'll do something similar to what I did here. I'll just kind of go through the episodes, but I'll basically just be reiterating what I said in my written reviews. And then I will do, at the end of the season, I'll do an episodes 6 through 10 video as well. But all 10 of them will have written reviews on Facebook. So thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.